Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into the incredibly deep time relationship between life and our planet to answer one of science's absolute biggest questions. We're going to be exploring some groundbreaking research from John Cantelou that completely reframes Earth's history. So instead of just picturing life adapting to this static, unchanging rock floating in space, we're looking at a deeply intertwined, co-evolving system. It's almost like a giant puzzle where the pieces actually change shape the longer you play with them.
You know, whenever we look back at the deep, deep history of Earth, we always tend to ask this ultimate binary question. Is life inherently good for the planet's habitability, or is it inherently bad? Are we the caretakers or the destroyer? It's this massive debate that has fundamentally shaped how we viewed the biosphere for decades.
So on one extreme, you have the famous Gaia hypothesis. This basically argues that the collective activity of the biosphere acts like a stabilizing homeostatic caretaker, kind of constantly adjusting the planetary thermostat to keep things favorable for life. But then on the exact opposite extreme, we've got the Medea hypothesis. This view claims that life is often this self-destructive force, where biological innovations just continually degrade the environment, sometimes literally triggering mass extinctions. So which is it? Are we dealing with a caretaker or a destroyer?
Well, according to the research we're unpacking today, trying to label life as universally good or bad is just a fundamentally flawed way to look at Earth's history. Actually, we've been asking the totally wrong question, shoving the complex, multi-billion-year history of Earth into this simple Gaia versus Medea binary. It just doesn't work. It forces us to apply one single overarching direction to processes that are highly contingent on specific times, specific spaces, and specific organisms.
Instead, we really need a paradigm shift. We need to move to a concept called recursive constraint reorganization, or RCR for short. Now, this framework views Earth almost like a game, where the players accidentally rewrite the rulebook just by playing it. Life doesn't just adapt to the board, it physically reconstructs the possibility space for whatever comes next. Basically, it's a mechanism where prevailing constraints shape present activity, which then modifies those conditions, and that constructs brand new constraints for all future trajectories. Make sense?
You can see exactly how this works right here. Notice how the RCR trajectory perfectly maps out the way biological and planetary histories are physically coupled together. Following the flow, you see this historical recursion in action. It's a continuous, path-dependent sequence. This isn't just a simple circle where things return to exactly how they started. No way. Every single time life alters the physical bounds of the planet, the next generation of life inherits a completely different set of rules. Let's break it down step by step. It works in 4 distinct phases. First up, life inherits prevailing planetary constraints. So that's the current state of the atmosphere, the oceans, the baseline chemistry. Second, biological activity happens right within those bounds. Third, that activity inevitably modifies those planetary conditions. And finally, step 4, those persistent changes form a newly reconstructed rulebook, altered constraints for all subsequent activity. The evolutionary background, it is literally never static.
So, if life isn't inherently a stabilizing caretaker or a destructive force by its very nature, how do we judge the impact of a biological event, right? If we can't just slap a Gaia or Medea label on it, how do we evaluate what actually happened when life profoundly changed the planet? Well, the answer is simple, but it unravels a massive mystery.
Because context is absolutely everything. We have to specify exactly what we are measuring against before we can assign any outcome labels. We need what we call reference conditions. This means we have to clearly state the focal organization, like, are we talking about a single microbe population or the entire biosphere? We need the spatial scale and the geological timescale. We also need a clear viability criterion, meaning what does survival actually look like for this specific group? And finally, a baseline counterfactual trajectory. We're basically asking, what would have happened if this biological activity never even occurred? Without all of this, calling something stabilizing or destabilizing is just kind of meaningless.
Section 10, the Great Oxidation Event, an epic case study in transformation.
Let's apply this RCR framework to what is perhaps the most high-stakes case study in Earth's history. Over a massive span of time, we're talking roughly 2.43 to 2.22 billion years ago, early photosynthetic life, specifically cyanobacteria, slowly pumped oxygen into the atmosphere. Before this, the prevailing planetary constraint was a strictly low oxygen environment. But through their biological activity, interacting with planetary sinks, they fundamentally reconstructed the planet's surface chemistry. They essentially caused the world's very first global pollution crisis.
Which brings us right back to our central debate. Was this profound, literally apocalyptic chemical change a Gaian miracle of life-improving habitability? Or was it a Medean disaster, where life poisoned its own home?
Well, it depends entirely on who you ask. For the existing anaerobic microbes, organisms that literally found oxygen to be a deadly poison, this was a total Median apocalypse. It severely contracted their viable environment. But if you look at the emerging aerobic life that eventually followed, this exact same oxygenation was a Gaian enabler. It created a completely new possibility space that allowed for highly energetic aerobic respiration. Talk about a real game changer.
Because of this, the Great Oxidation Event wasn't simply stabilizing or destabilizing overall. Under the RCR framework, it's actually classified as a transformative consequence. It completely displaced the old viability structure to establish a totally new planetary regime. You see, transformation isn't intrinsically Gaian or Medean as a whole. It's a fundamental reorganization of the rules, which then has deeply divergent consequences depending on exactly which biological group you are looking at.
Section 15. Terrestrial Vegetation. Long-term climate regulation.
Let's look at another monumental shift, the expansion of vegetation onto land. This gives us a totally different flavor of constraint reorganization. As early vascular plants colonized the continents, they didn't just passively sit on the rocks. Oh no, their roots aggressively broke up the ground, shifting water hydrology and secreting organic acids. These biological modifications fundamentally enhanced a strictly geochemical process known as the chemical weathering of silicate minerals.
Now, here is where the recursion kicks in powerfully. Silicate weathering actually removes carbon dioxide from the atmosphere over geological timescales. And because weathering happens faster in higher temperatures, it creates this massive planet-wide negative feedback loop. Think about it. Warmer conditions enhance weathering, which removes more CO2 from the air, which in turn actively cools the planet down. Plants literally took an existing geochemical loop and biologically hardwired it.
Under the RCR framework, if we explicitly specify the long-term biosphere climate regime as our focal point, this continuous climate stabilization is a uniquely Gaian outcome. It is life reconstructing the planet's constraints in a way that actually contributes to maintaining a viable, stable climate over hundreds of millions of years. It's a completely mind-bending concept. I mean, the plants didn't do this on purpose with some kind of planetary foresight. It's just a deeply ingrained historical consequence of their local activity scaling all the way up.
Section 19. Methane oxidation, biological damping.
But it's important to remember that not all biological impacts are these massive, million-year global transformations. Recursive constraint reorganization happens at local scales too. Consider marine methane oxidation. In shallow marine waters, methane is constantly being produced, but before this incredibly potent greenhouse gas can reach the atmosphere and warm the planet, methanotrophic microbes biologically consume a huge fraction of it. They act as a localized biological damper, effectively stabilizing greenhouse gases before they can trigger wider planetary changes.
And this brilliantly illustrates the definitive takeaway of this entire framework. Whether we are looking at localized methane damping, continental-scale climate regulation by plants, or the apocalyptic planetary transformation of the Great Oxidation Event, the story is exactly the same. Earth and its biosphere are locked in a continuous, path-dependent coevolution. Life doesn't just adapt to a static environment. It recursively reconstructs it, constantly shifting the boundaries of what is absolutely possible.
Which leaves us with this final, truly fascinating thought. We're still playing this game of recursive constraint reorganization right now, as biological activity, including our very own human activity, relentlessly continues to modify planetary conditions and rewrite the Earth's rulebook. What new constraints are we inadvertently constructing for the ecological and planetary regimes of tomorrow?